Jenkins is on now, independent statistician and political commentator, because the COVID app is pinging like crazy. Jamie, how are you?
Good morning, Patrick. You good?
I'm very well, thank you. Oh, and our YouTube viewers have the glory of your face in ultra high definition, which is fantastic. Certainly better than mine this morning. Jamie, what's going on with this over pinging? For something like, is it 500,000 people have been pinged? I mean, we shutting down our economy for all of this stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, we've seen these rising cases, Patrick, across the country, and obviously with many people having this app and it's using this Bluetooth technology to see if you're kind of in close contact with people. As cases are going up, as more mixing's going on, I suppose the app is doing what the app was designed to do, but I don't think anybody expected these kind of large numbers. It's been under 300,000 since February most of the time, but it's gone a sharp increase as cases have gone up the past few weeks. And the way things are going, Patrick, we might even hit 1 million over the next few weeks because obviously cases continuing to rise. But the problem is it too sensitive? I've heard of stories, Patrick, where you could be living next door to somebody who's got COVID. You've not actually been in any contact with them, and it's pinging you because you're in the house next door.
Absolutely, and our YouTube viewers will again be able to see what I'm holding up now on the front of the Telegraph. You're absolutely spot on about this. Neighbours pinged through walls by app, and they're not coming into contact with them, which is the point, right? And I just find it a bit staggering, really, which is, you know, the fact that you said there, you know, maybe 1 million people a day. Well, 47% of the current crop of people apparently have already been double jabbed. So really, you could argue why they're being pinged at all. You know, I just wonder whether or not now it seems a bit needless, doesn't it?
Well, I think part of the issue as well is I've heard of stories where people have been kind of pinged, they're self-isolating, but then they're actually having a test. They're coming back negative, but kind of there's a bit of a grey area here because people think what the app does when it pings you is you have to self-isolate for 10 days. It's slightly different when the app pings you to when one of the contact tracers gets in touch with you because it's more guidance. There's no legal requirement to actually self-isolate.
Talk us through that, please, mate, because talk me through that then, because I think our listeners will be very intrigued by that. So what's that then? So the difference between when you get pinged on your phone or when a contact tracer gets in contact tracer, sounds like something out of Star Wars, doesn't it? But go on, just tell me about that, please.
Yeah, so basically the way the app works is it's all anonymized, so people don't actually know who's behind the person who's got the app downloaded. It's just using technology to see if the app recognizes who's in close contact with each other. So there's no actual data. Nobody holds the data that you're actually being there. It's slightly different when you're scanning into different venues and you might get in touch by a contact tracer. So if a contact tracer gets in touch with you, there is a requirement for you to self-isolate for 10 days. If the app pings you and nobody's phoning you, it's more guidance that you don't have to do the self-isolation. And I've heard of stories, Patrick, as well, where people are getting pinged, they are following through and self-isolating. And obviously, if you've been stuck at home for 10 days, you're going to go out and do a few things.
Yeah.
And then I've heard of stories, and a couple of days later, they've been pinged again. And you just can't keep pinging and pinging and pinging people. And another thing that could be going on here, Patrick, as well, you might go to a venue, say the cinema, and you could even scan your phone with the NHS Trace app as well. You might go to the cinema, go to a completely different viewing room to where somebody else is going, being nowhere near anybody who's tested positive, and you might start getting asked to self-isolate. So I think things have gone a bit far now with this app.
I don't understand how. Sorry, Joe, I just interrupt, but I don't understand how any pubs are still open. Because if you think about it, if you run a pub where occasionally people turn up to it, right? Well, presumably the way things are going now, at least one of those people over the course of last week, you would imagine, may have had coronavirus or at least come in contact with someone who has, etc. How is any pub still open? Because if the pinging is so sensitive now, you know, if you're within a mile radius of someone, pretty much, if you run any kind of public fronting venue whatsoever, now surely you're going to end up with all of your staff self-isolating at some point, given the current setup.
Well, I think what you've probably got here, Patrick, is that obviously downloading the app is voluntary, and maybe I know of people who've been kind of uninstalling the app. If all staff in pubs had the app, you're probably right, because if somebody turns up into the pub and tests positive, I'm assuming the whole pub would have to close down because all the staff would be asked to self-isolate. We've got, I think the Nissan plant up in Sunderland, the unions have been saying 10% of staff have been kind of self-isolating, putting at risk the plant there. Supermarkets are saying lorry drivers are self-isolating, putting a risk on supermarket shelves. So something needs to change. If we're going to have so-called Freedom Day, and I know it's not as free as what some people are calling, we're going to see an increase in cases again. So if the government are happy to accept that, and Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty have inevitably said that that's going to happen, they really need to think through these rules around self-isolation, in particular the double jabbed.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot that they need to rethink, isn't there? And I was quite annoyed last week. I made the point, actually, that, Patrick Vallance, for example, was pictured again at Wimbledon, obviously, without a mask on, despite telling us all we need to wear masks in public. And look, again, my issue is not that he wasn't really wearing a mask. My issue is that he's telling us all to do it, right? I don't believe that people should necessarily be, wearing masks in Wimbledon. I'm not having a go at that. But what I am saying is, if you wouldn't mind practicing what you preach, that would be lovely for us. We wouldn't mind a little bit of that. But yeah, so where do we go from here now? Because does the government, in your opinion, does the government have to fundamentally change the way that this app works now? Because if we keep going like this, as you've alluded to there and I alluded to before, it's not Freedom Day, and look, we need to get the economy going, don't we?
Well, that's true. The latest estimates, Patrick, even when hospitality opened, there were still 2 million people on furlough. So you've got a huge number of people who haven't gone back to work yet. That might start seeing the unemployment figures go up. We've got all these people being pinged. I think inevitably, as I've said, we're going to see cases continue to rise. The good thing, I suppose, is the vaccine rollout has meant that there's been a break between the number of cases going up and people getting seriously ill and passing. On my Twitter feed, I track that every single day, and you can clearly see the effect of that. So with the vaccine rollout, there's a game changer there, Patrick, that this app was developed very, many months ago before all of this. I think if people have got double jabbed or they're testing negative, it makes no sense to continue to keep them self-isolating for 10 days. And I think there needs to be a fundamental look at the app, really, because you might get pinged one day, pinged another day, and it's just carnage out there, isn't it?
Repeatedly pinged. I've not been. It's normally the kind of thing you have to pay for in Soho, I believe. But it's interesting as well on the front of the eye. COVID testing labs buckle under the size of third wave, and it's language like that I'm not sure. Are we in a third wave? And they will say yes, as is their right, because they'll say, well, hang on, we're getting nearly 50,000 new infections a day, which sounds like a third wave, doesn't it? But that used to mean that we must have been getting huge amounts of deaths per day as well. And you alluded to it there. The vaccine rollout has been a triumph. It's been an international triumph, actually, and we've been at the forefront of that, and that's great. But actually, the 50,000 new infections a day is not seeing a correlation between necessarily the huge amount of hospital admissions. It's not seeing a correlation between a huge amount of deaths. We've broken that chain, I think, haven't we? And so, is it a third wave, do you think? Is it fair to say that?
Well, it's fair to say it's a third wave of cases, but it's not a third wave as what we would have thought of a wave of COVID in the past, because, the cases are rising. They're predominantly among younger people. It's been kind of people who are 10 to 19 and 20 to 29 has been the biggest rising cases. In the past, Patrick, what we saw is young people caught the virus. It then soon spread into older people. Now, the older people had the vaccine several months ago. We're not seeing the same link as what we saw in the past. And one of my criticism as well is if you just look at we are seeing rises in hospital admissions, but what the government don't do, we don't see a distinction between people who've been admitted because COVID has made them seriously ill to go into hospital, or people who are just having to go into hospital. And every time you go into hospital, you get a test. So with more cases in society, you get more cases everywhere. So some of the increase in hospital admissions will just be the fact that there are more people in there. You, for example, could have COVID, break your leg this afternoon, go into hospital, and you'd be a COVID admission, not going in breaking your leg.
Absolutely.
Slight increase in deaths, but nowhere near what we saw in the past.
Absolutely spot on. Thank you very much for making the time for us, especially so early on in the morning, and being as coherent as you are. Thank you very much. Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician and political commentator, talking about the COVID app over pinging 500,000 people, apparently, a week in the last week have been pinged.